Greetings, brethren, and welcome to our presentation today, where we will address this topic of the Solemn Assembly, found in Joel chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. This is a topic of considerable confusion amongst professed Davidians, so we want to address those issues, but first we want to teach the truth and get there by asking the following questions. What takes place during the Solemn Assembly? What's going on? How about the time frame? Is it before Ezekiel 9 or after? And the big question, are all the 144,000 to be gathered in one location in the United States? That's what many people are teaching. Is it true? Well, we're going to look at that more carefully. And then we'll address the question, well, how is it that the 144,000 are going to get transported either to this one location or to the kingdom? So we want to look at all of this. So before we begin, let us start with this text for meditation. I'll read from the Book of Education, page 170. It reads, God intends that to the earnest seeker the truths of his word shall be ever unfolding. While the secret things belonged unto the Lord our God, those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. The idea that certain portions of the Bible cannot be understood has led to neglect of some of its most important truths. The fact needs to be emphasized and often repeated that the mysteries of the Bible are not such because God has sought to conceal truth, but because of our own weakness or ignorance makes us incapable of comprehending or appropriating truth. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God, that we may be thoroughly furnished unto all good works, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. So we want to be really careful here, not to neglect our opportunity to become acquainted with present truth found in the Golden Bowl and the Shepherd's Rod, especially on the topic of the Solemn Assembly, because there's been a lot of confusion and wrong teaching along this subject. But we want to seek out the truth as we find it in the Golden Bowl. So take a moment and prayer and clear the slate and invite the Holy Spirit to come and guide, lead, and direct you to all truth. So we invite you to have your prayer and then join us as we enter into our discussion. So here's the key text for examination. Only 2 verses of the Bible, but ones we need to understand. It reads in Joel chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, and those that suck the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth of his chamber, and the bride out of her closet. So here are these key verses, and this is where we get this phrase, solemn assembly. So what's going on here? Well, a trumpet's being blown. There's a fast being called for to sanctify a fast and to sanctify the congregation. So we need to really understand what's going on here. And of course, to get the answer, we need to go and look for the truth in the Golden Bowl. But first, here's some historical background. Why is this such a topic of controversy? Well, it has been told on Old Mount Carmel Center, under the direction of Brother Houteff, he had an amphitheater built on the expectation that there was to be an alleged solemn assembly. Well, is that true or not? Did he build an amphitheater? And did Brother Houteff believe that there's going to be a solemn assembly where all the 144,000 are going to be gathered there in Waco, Texas? Well, we want to look at the evidence for that. Later, Florence Houteff and her executive council did call for a solemn assembly in the spring of 1959, based on a false doctrine that the 42 months of Revelation 11:2 began in November 1955, and this was announced in 11 Symbolic Code number 1. Well, most of us recognize that this was false. The teaching on the 42 months in Revelation 11:2, we've recently done a video, the link in the description box below if you want to get up to speed of what the Rod is really teaching on that 42 months and avoid the errors not only of Florence, but also of other Davidians, especially Bashan. Later, M.J. Bingham, who started Bashan, begins to teach a counterfeit version of the Solemn Assembly in 1965 in a publication called Timely Truth Educator, volumes 9 and 10, number 1, pages 11 to 15. And in this, he weaves in his false doctrines of Jacob typology, two Jacob's time of trouble, and so forth. So this did not add clarity. It only created confusion. And as it turns out, most Davidians are following some version of this confused doctrine coming from Bashan. So before we can sort this mess out, we have to go study the rod and get our doctrine from the Golden Bowl. That's what we're told. So that's what we're going to do. There's really 3 principal references in the original shepherd's rod that we're going to look at carefully, not letting a line or even a word escape our attention. So let us enter in. The first reference here is Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 8, page 22. We're going to look at a couple paragraphs. And we see here that no one's to be excluded. Okay, here's the key quote, Joel 2, 15, 16. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and those that suck the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth of his chamber and the bride out of her closet. And then Brother Houteff comments. In these verses, as in Joel 2:1, the command is given to blow the trumpet in Zion. So there's a trumpet that blew in verse 1, and now in verse 15, another trumpet is being blown in Zion. This second trumpet, however, is not to announce the day of God, but to sanctify both the fast and the people, to call a solemn assembly from which no one is to be excluded from the assembly. Now, this is the reference that people grab onto to make the argument that all the 144,000 have to be gathered into one place in the United States prior to the kingdom. But let us look a little more carefully at this, especially that word in bold, excluded. What does Brother Houteff mean by that? Is the word excluded the same as the word absent? Let's look at it more carefully and ask these questions. Does excluded, as Brother Houteff used it, always mean that you have to be bodily present, i.e., that all the 144,000 are to be gathered in one location? Is that what he meant? If that's the case, why didn't he use the word absent? That would be very clear. But excluded, if that's true, then is there other supporting evidence from the Golden Bowl that the 144,000 will all be gathered in one location in the United States prior to the kingdom? We have to confirm it. It's called the weight of evidence principle. So that's what we're going to do. And then address, well, if you really believe that, then if so, then how do the 144,000, which are scattered now in locations around the world, get transported from their home countries to wherever it is they're supposed to be gathered? That's the million-dollar question. Nobody wants to address that. How are you going to get from Zimbabwe or Philippines or Mexico to somewhere in the U.S.? Are you going to walk? You going to ride a boat? I mean, you can't even travel right now. You can't leave Africa and come to the U.S. because of what? COVID. Travel restrictions. So we got a little problem here. How is it that we're going to solve that? Or is it perhaps that we've misunderstood and misapplied the reference? That's why we need to look at everything that Brother Houteff says to better understand what this solemn assembly really is. So let us go in there. We'll go into the next paragraph on that same reference. Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 8, page 22. He quotes Joel 2:17. Let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep between the porch and the altar, and let them say, Spare thy people, O Lord, and give not thy heritage to reproach, that the heathen should rule over them. Wherefore should they say among the people, Where is their God? Then Brother Houteff comments, Here we are plainly told that God's people are to face persecution and distress, and that unless they keep close to the Lord, their very existence may be at stake. God's name dishonored, and the heathen allowed to rule over them and to challenge their faith in God. So here we see that God's people are going to face persecution and distress, but this does not show us that it's in any one location in the U.S. I mean, God's people are facing persecution and distress right now in areas all around the world, so we don't get any real hard evidence here about a solemn assembly being one location in the United States. So we've got to go further. And this is where it gets interesting. We're going to look at Answer Book number 3, page 64, telling us about Mount Carmel's purpose. Let's read this passage. Of necessity, then, Mount Carmel Center is being built as a base of operations for what? Training and fitting workers to carry this special message to the church. Next, for educating deserving youth. Next, for caring for the worthy poor, aged, widowed, and orphan. And for ministering to the sick and infirmed, according to God's plan. It has heard God's double charge to it. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. Isaiah 58, verse 1. And then Brother Hadif quotes Joel 2, 15, 16. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, and those that suck the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth of his chamber, and the bride out of her closet. So in direct connection, we see Joel 2, 15, 16, tied in with Isaiah 58, 1. Cry aloud, spare not. And it's directly connected with the work that Mount Carmel Center was being built up. And we're talking about the Mount Carmel Center under the direction of the prophet, Brother Hadif, that was established in 1935 and then was eventually sold off by 1957. So it was built up for that purpose of training, educating, caring, and ministering, according to God's plan. This is not some future event. This was active present tense in that day. Answer Book number 3 was published in 1944. So when we look at Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, from the period of 1935 until Brother Hadif died in 1955, it was established for the purpose of building up the message. Its foundation being Universal Publishing Association and the publishing of the original literature. That was its primary objective. In addition, they built up branches of the work, which included a rest home for the old people to take care of the sick. Also, it included schools, DLI, a ministerial training program to train up Bible workers. It also included a school for children. It had agricultural enterprises, peach orchard, and farms to grow their own food. It was a self-sufficient community. So that encompassed the work of Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, under Brother Hadif. This is not to be confused with the counterfeit, unauthorized Mount Carmel centers that exist today that are not doing any of this. They don't publish original literature. They aren't self-supporting agriculture enterprises. They don't have rest homes to take care of older Davidians. And they don't even have schools for the children. So we've got a little problem with people misappropriating titles to themselves in the days after Brother Hadif. But we're talking about building up Mount Carmel under the direction of the prophet. And this is a layout of that land from the view. Right now, today, if you took this picture from this very angle, you would see a complete, highly developed urban setting in the city of Waco with schools and shopping centers and wastewater treatment plants and so forth, and high-class residents. So this is not the same as today as it was back then. So let's look further in the next paragraph about Carmel, Mount Carmel's great burden. When it has accomplished, referring to Mount Carmel Center, this closing work for the church, Testimonies, Volume 3, page 266, then those who have overcome every temptation and strength of the mighty one, who have sighed and cried and escaped the destruction, will be as David, and the house of David shall be as God, and as the angel of the Lord before them, Zechariah 12, verse 8. Davidians indeed, a great people and strong, Joel 2, verse 2. Clad in the armor of Christ's righteousness, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners, to go forth into all the world, conquering and to conquer. Prophets and Kings, page 725. In this way, the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists are to gather all the saints to the house of the Lord. Mount Carmel's great burden is to get this manifold work done as soon as possible so that we may go home to our eternal rest, no more to be fettered with the shackles of sin. So you can clearly see that in that time, the calling for a fast, an assembly, to sanctify themselves was active and ongoing in the days of old Mount Carmel. And brethren, I would submit to you that the work of sighing and crying and pleading with the church is not done yet. It's still ongoing. Now, let's look at this reference. This gets really interesting. Write this down. Symbolic Code, Volume 2, Number 9, page 2. We're going to look at several paragraphs. So the call is to blow the trumpet in Zion. So Joel's prophecy quoted above, this is Joel chapter 2, verses 15 to 17. Read this. Must meet its fulfillment in the time when probation's hours are fast closing. For the word says, let the bridegroom go forth out of his chamber and the bride out of her closet. The term let means to allow it to be so. And as the bridegroom is Christ at the time when he is to be crowned or married in the New Jerusalem, his bride, Revelation 21, verse 9, this scripture cannot meet its fulfillment at any other time than when this event, to which all heaven and earth have been looking forward, is about to take place. Therefore, the Lord is urging us to blow the trumpet in Zion, the church, and to hasten the time of the crowning of him, King of kings and Lord of lords, the time in which he closes his mediatorial work and goes forth of his chamber, the most holy place. So I ask the question, are we to blow the trumpet in Zion? Was it being blown in the days when this was published? The answer is yes. It's still being blown today. So this is not talking about something that's going to happen in the future. It was active present tense in the days this was published. And let's look at this. It's confirmed very clearly here in the next paragraph here, Volume 2, Symbolic Code Number 9, page 2. Next paragraph. And note when this was published, 1936. Brother Out of Comments, the command, gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, and those that suck the breast, signifies a complete separation of the world, of old and young, both maids and little children and women, that what? Sigh and cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. Ezekiel 9, verses 4 and 6. And being prophetically made to the church, Zion, this command evidences that the fact that the trumpet shall blow in fulfillment of this scripture, it will find Zion, his church, unsanctified and commingled with the world. Therefore comes the call for sanctification. Brethren, is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Zion, unsanctified and commingled with the world? Oh, yes. They were in 1936, and today it's even worse in 2021. So, yes, the call for sanctification has been going on ever since 1936, and it's still ongoing. And the sanctify the congregation signifies what? A complete separation from the world. Are you separating from the world? Are you still watching television? Are you still attending meetings where the truth is being perverted? Are you still wandering around the wasteland of Facebook, chit-chatting and, on the devil's territory? God calls us to separate from error and to advance in the truth. Are you still supporting organizations that teach the new code errors? So we see the call to separate and to sanctify ourselves is an ongoing present truth. And look at this. Joel 2, verses 15 to 17 is being fulfilled literally right now. Look at this reference here. It's in the next paragraph, Volume 2, Symbolic Code Number 9, page 2, paragraph 1. The conditions further prove that this scripture meets its fulfillment. When? Now. Because the church at that present time has, by her institutions, entangled herself with the institutions of the world. But we thank the Lord that years ago the spirit of prophecy predicted that somebody was to come in the spirit power of Elijah, TM, page 475, and that God will have men who are true to duty. At the right time, he sends his faithful messengers to do a work similar to that of Elijah. Testimonies of Church, Volume 5, page 254. Brethren, Joel 2, calling for a solemn assembly, was being fulfilled in 1936, and it hasn't stopped. The condition of the church getting entangled with the world is even worse than it was in Brother Haddif's day. Just look at the situation on the COVID vaccine. We've got a video on that. Look in the description box below. The church is wholesale following the world, following the Vatican, when we should be crying aloud, sparing not, calling people to follow our laws of health and simple natural remedies. But the church has turned its back on Christ. So this idea that some Davidians have that the solemn assembly is in the future is completely false. This is the last paragraph on that reference. Volume 2, Symbolic Code number 9, page 2, paragraph 2, or column 2, paragraph 1. The foregoing prophecies are now, that's present tense, becoming history. And this prophetic organ, the symbolic code, proves to be the mouthpiece of Elijah, of the Elijah message, leading hundreds of Seventh-day Adventists in the world of helping this message to restore the defunct and decadent institutes of the Christian religion. For as it is written, Elias truly shall first come, restore all things. Matthew 17, verse 11. And the time of the end, every divine institution is to be restored. Prophets and Kings, page 678. So the symbolic code was an instrumental component of sanctifying a fast, to call a solemn assembly in Brother Haddif's day. And we're talking about the authorized original old codes published by Brother Haddif from Volume 1, number 1 to Volume 10, number 2. We're not talking about the counterfeit, unauthorized codes that were published after Brother Haddif died. That creates so much confusion amongst us as Davidians. That is a unauthorized contribution from Florence, and we reject those. So the fulfillment of those prophecies were taking place in the days that Brother Haddif wrote this, and they're still taking place today. The situation has not improved. It's only getting worse. So we're pleading with Mother to bring about the end of all things. So what can we learn with? That's what the Golden Bowl tells us. Let's summarize it. The solemn assembly of Joel 2, verses 15 and 16, was connected intimately with the work of Old Mount Carmel Center, specifically involving training, educating, caring, and administering according to God's plan. Next, the solemn assembly is a call for sanctification that signified a complete separation of the world. Brethren, that message was called by Brother Haddif, and it hasn't gone away. The message is still alive and well, speaking to us today to separate from anything that would separate us from God. If you look at the old codes, that was the instrumentality. They are particular not only in doctrine, but in every habit and practice, even down to how to keep your toothbrush free from germs. It was that particular. Health reform, dress reform, every aspect of our Christian life. The scriptures were being fulfilled in 1936 and continue to be fulfilled to the present day. Unescapable. There is no call for a solemn assembly that is yet future, involving the ingathering of all the 144,000 from around the world into a single location in the United States. This is utter falsehood. So, brethren, where's all the confusion come from? Well, now we know what the truth is. Then we can address the issue, where did these strange ideas about the solemn assembly come from? Well, let's address that now. It came from unsuspected foes and is connected with the knockout blow. Of course, we're familiar with this reference. White House Recruiter, page 33, published by Brother Haddif in 1951. It reads, "Everything that can be done against God's message of today will be done with even greater vengeance than was manifest against heaven's message in the days of Christ's first advent. For the devil knows that if he loses now, he loses forever, that he is to have no other chance. Unparalleled, therefore, is the urgency that every 11th hour church member now quickly and solidly brace himself against the enemy's effort to deliver a knockout blow. We must be alert, too, to realize that the blow is to come from surprisingly unsuspected foes, from professed friends of the gospel, who are no less pious than were the priests in Christ's day." So who are these professed friends of the gospel that the enemy's going to use to attempt to knock the message out? Well, first and foremost was none other than this woman, Florence Houteff, the wife of Brother Houteff, one of his closest associates. And most Davidians recognize this. So what did she do in regard to the Solemn Assembly? Well, she and her council committed a colossal blunder by interpreting Revelation 11:2 that the 42 months was going to have a future application, and it began in November of 1955. This was announced in 11 Symbolic Code number 1. So in the spring of 1959, they called for a solemn assembly. This is a meeting held from her executive council, March 30, 1959, and here's a copy of that. And in this document, we'll look at this paragraph. It would be the fourth paragraph. States, G.W. Sather now moved. Okay, they had this big discussion about the solemn assembly, and then this brother Sather moved, quote, that a resolution be drawn up that all Davidians in the country, that is the United States, assemble at Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, on or before April 16, 1959, and that all Davidians in foreign countries be notified of this meeting, and that they also hold themselves in readiness where they are to get their deliverance from the Assyrian yoke, that these announcements be sent out as soon as possible. So here we see in this meeting that the motion was made to call a solemn assembly and to gather all the people in the United States into one place. And it wasn't Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas. Actually, that was a misleading. It was that property was sold off in 1957, so it was Elk, Texas, about 15 miles outside of Waco. New Mount Carmel, as we identify it. So this is where the idea came from. It was cooked up into the minds of Florence Houteff and her council. And the members present, there they are listed. Florence Houteff, her brother T.O. Hermanson, George Sather, the mother Sophia Hermanson, it's a family affair, J.R. Custer, J.O. Conrad, and Miss Mary Allen. Signed off and dated. This does not come from the original Shepherd's Rod. This does not come from the writings of Victor Houteff. It comes solely from this group of people, Florence Houteff and her council. The idea of gathering everybody into one place. Well, we all know the results of that. The solemn assembly gained the attention of the local news media. Over 1,000 Davidians were gathered from all over the United States. Sadly, the projected event came and passed and created a colossal blunder of such magnitude that most attendees lost faith and eventually rejected the Rod message. Now, we've documented that in other videos on the history of this message. What I would like to do is play for you a video clip from a news station in Dallas-Fort Worth talking about this gathering, this so-called solemn assembly. So I'll play it now.
At Mount Carmel Center, 941 acres of farmland, 15 miles northeast of Waco, some 600 members of a religious group which called itself the Davidians gathered to pray for the events which they said would lead to the second coming of Christ. From all over the United States and parts of Canada, Davidians were flocking to this, the organization's world headquarters. Many sold most of their possessions and were making new homes in tents while they met and prayed for the fulfillment of biblical prophecies which would bring about the establishment of God's kingdom in Jerusalem following a war of all nations in the Holy Land. Davidians expected the war to break out in the Middle East within a few weeks. The Davidians, who had been rebuked by the Seventh-day Adventist Church from which they sprang, planned to go to Jerusalem following the war to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. Officials of the group tabbed as erroneous newspaper stories which said Davidians believed the war they were expecting would bring about the end of the world. Davidian pastor Dudley Goff explained the group's beliefs to Texas News cameraman Floyd Bright.
We feel that world conditions are such, in line with prophecy, that all nations are soon to gather against Jerusalem to battle. In fact, we expect that to be this spring. And according to the prophecy of Zechariah 14 and verse 2, the Lord says there that he's going to gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the purpose in his gathering all nations there to battle is that he might prepare the land so that he can set up his kingdom, so that his people might return there and set up his kingdom in compliance or in fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel 2:44, where the Lord says he's going to set up his kingdom down in the last days. That particular prophecy is brought out on this small chart that I have here that pictures the great image of Daniel 2, which was smote by this stone upon his feet, which Daniel said breaks the image to pieces, and Daniel said that this stone is God's kingdom that is set up in the days of these kings that are represented by the toes. Now, Daniel also told us that this stone grew into a great mountain. In other words, this stone is just a nucleus of God's kingdom to begin with, and then it begins to grow, and he says it becomes a great mountain, and it fills the entire earth. Now, that is the thing that we're expecting to come about very soon, and the beginning of it is this war in Palestine that results in the clearing of the land for God's people to go there.
Okay, that's what the world reported. So this was not a secret thing. It's a very sad tragedy because, of course, the date came and went and nothing happened. Some people have likened this to some kind of a disappointment, but we should be careful. This is nothing of the nature of a disappointment like, for example, in October 22, 1844. That disappointment was God leading the people, and then they came to a better understanding. This whole thing was a satanic counterfeit. Okay, people were duped, okay, by a lie. There's no truth in this so-called a solemn assembly to gather the people into one location. It was a total counterfeit. Now, you notice there, Dudley Goff was a spokesman for this. And those two other brothers there, that was Oliver Hermanson and George Sather. So they gave their approval to all this program. So a lot of Davidians were deceived by this. We'll have some more research about this particular thing with Dudley Goff here in the future, so stay tuned. But we see here the results of this. It was a colossal blunder that created a great reproach. You would think Davidians would end it there, but unfortunately, other Davidians are leading the flock blindfolded into perdition. And what am I talking about? Well, the Bashan group on Facebook has a group called the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Association. And there, 1 week ago, well, today's February 21, so it would be February 14th or February 13th, they posted a study on the Solemn Assembly. Not only a Zoom meeting or a webinar, but then a PDF document of their presentation. And in this presentation, they presented a number of erroneous ideas, foremost being that this idea of a solemn assembly would be a future event in which all the 144,000 would be gathered into one place in the United States. And guess where that is? Hint, hint, Bashan Hill, Exeter, Missouri. So that's what they believed. They published it. They spread this all over the place. And so it's not a secret now. Where did this come from? This brother Davin that presented it. Well, it came from the mind of M.J. Bingham, the one that started Bashan and used his publications to introduce a number of heterodox or false doctrines. So we searched this out, and this publication, we'll identify it here in the next slide, but the claim is made clear for the first time. Now, Bingham did oppose the teaching of Florence 42 months in terms of date setting. However, his remedy to it was not a solution because he introduced a bunch of uninspired ideas based on the new codes. Our prior video on the 42 months of Revelation 11:2, link in the description box below, teaches the truth on this and exposes the false teaching coming out of Bashan. But this is what he had to say about the Solemn Assembly. He said, "Thus, for the first time, it becomes clear just how and when are fulfilled Sister White's following statement." So now he's quoting Spirit of Prophecy. "I saw the saints leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. It was an hour of fearful, terrible agony to the saints. Day and night they cried unto God for deliverance. The wicked had already begun to triumph, crying out, 'Why doesn't your God deliver you out of our hands? Why don't you go up and save your lives?' But the saints heeded them not. like Jacob, they were wrestling with God. The angels long to deliver them, but they must wait a little longer. The people of God must drink of the cup and be baptized with the baptism. The angels, faithful to their trust, continued their watch. God would not suffer his name to be reproached among the heathen. The time had nearly come when he was to manifest mighty power and gloriously deliver his saints. For his name's glory, he would deliver every one of those who had patiently waited for him and whose names were written in the book. As the saints left the cities and villages, they were pursued by the wicked who sought to slay them. But the swords that were raised to kill God's people broke and fell as powerless as straw. The angels of God shielded the saints. They cried day and night for deliverance. Their cry came up before the Lord. Now, here's the reference. Early Writings, page 282, 283, 284, and 285. He borrowed portions of that. And he underlined or emphasized this idea that all the saints are going to be gathered into one place. Brethren, stop. Is that what Ellen White was talking about? And the answer is no. These are taken out of context. What Ellen White is talking about the experience of the great multitude during the loud cry. So Bingham is misappropriating spirit of prophecy to fit his preconceived idea of a solemn assembly during the 42 months before Ezekiel 9. Utter falsehood. And now he goes on and comments. There, in sharp delineation, is the time of Jacob's trouble, to be delivered from which he cries day and night unto the Lord, and hears and answers by gloriously delivering him to the kingdom. And in the next section, second trumpet, this is of Joel 2, fast and solemn assembly. And then he goes on for the next several pages in this publication, Timely Truth Educator, volumes 9 and 10, number 1, January 1965. And if you look at the presentation that Bashan's circulating on the Solemn Assembly, this is where they got it from. Straight out of the unauthorized publication, The Timely Truth Educator, straight out of the brain of Martin James Bingham. Misapplying statements from the spirit of prophecy to fit his preconceived idea of the 42 months, which is based on the new code teachings. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. Now, we'll just summarize briefly where all this confusion comes from. This is from the presentation we did. There's a link in the description box below. But this idea we call the gap theory, that there's a gap of time between the sealing and the slaughter. And the reference in the new code, unauthorized new code sermon, is 11 Symbolic Code number 7, page 3. And in this gap of time is this 42 months or 3.5 years. And this is where Jacob's time of trouble takes place, the Assyrian Confederacy, and Jonah's phase of the message. All of this is false. Jacob's time of trouble takes place after Ezekiel 9. There's no such thing as a Assyrian Confederacy. There's a confederacy, yes, but this is taking place after Ezekiel 9. And the Jonah phase of the message is a cunningly devised fable. These are all new code ideas. Now, by way of summary, the original rod has clarity that at Ezekiel 9, that's a dividing line. In the period before that, we're in the section of the leopard-like beast. And this is the trouble. It's called the present trouble, 9 track 56. This is not Jacob's time of trouble. Okay? So yeah, there is trouble before Ezekiel 9, but it's called present trouble. And there is a future application of a 42 months, a 3.5 year that concludes at the great earthquake in Ezekiel 11, verse 13. Our previous video, we go through that in detail. So there is a 42-month period. But as far as Jacob's time of trouble, okay, as far as the gap of time, there's a half-hour silence. The marking and the slaying takes place within a period of about 7 days. And track number 1, page 38, makes that clear, that marking and slaying goes together hand in hand. They're not separated by a gap of time. This is a false concept that comes from the unauthorized new codes. So after Ezekiel 9, then we get the Jacob's time of trouble. Fundamental beliefs are very clear that subsequently, or after the four winds are let loose and blow, after Ezekiel 9, after the purification, then as the 144,000 are on their way home, that's when they experience Jacob's time of trouble. There will be a church confederacy and a church-state confederacy. Now, we get more into details of that on our other video. But clearly, misapplying statements and putting events in the wrong time frame creates all the confusion. So finally, what about the amphitheater? This idea that Brother Houteff is building an amphitheater to have a solemn assembly. Well, we've heard this from Davidians, like Sister Bonnie talked about it, and I've heard her say it, but what kind of evidence is there? Well, this is the only written evidence that can be found. It comes, once again, from a Bashan publication, Timely Truth Educator, number 3, volume 3, number 4, page 8. This is June 1959. And I'll read this first part of this paragraph. It said, the new Mount Carmel is an illegitimate, the issue of apostasy and usurpation power by the Sanhedrin Council. That's what Bingham referred to Florence Houteff and her council as the Sanhedrin Council. The new code is a mockery of the old codes. Well, which part? Of course, the part 11 symbolic code number 1 and number 5 that predicted the time setting for the 42 months, starting in November 55. Its 42-month theory is heresy. That's true. A contravention of the rod's revelation that and allied subjects. However, Bingham's answer to it was also confusion. It did not clarify what the rod taught. They have made it unlawfully a test of fellowship. They have new modeled the work, sold off Old Mount Carmel, contrary to the specific design of Brother Houteff to dispose off only excess acreage, and turned over to the Gentiles both the new print shop and the area which Brother Houteff excavated for an amphitheater for the solemn assembly. So we see here that this idea that there was an amphitheater. Now, Sister Bonnie talked about it, and it turns out that there is an area that was excavated for an amphitheater. I've been there. If you go there today, it's actually undeveloped. It was going to be developed into a little cul-de-sac where some homes, and it never, you can see the curbs for the sidewalks and the road, but it was never developed. It was an area roughly the size of perhaps a football stadium. Okay. Now, in a football stadium, how many people can you get in there? Well, maybe the biggest, like the Rose Bowl, you can maybe get 100,000 people. I've been in a football stadium in a general conference session, the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, Georgia, when they had the GC session 2010. That stadium on a Sabbath had roughly about 70 to 80,000 70 Adventists. It was about 3/4 full. So a football stadium, even at its biggest, probably could not fit 144,000 people. But the idea that Brother Houteff was building that for a solemn assembly, we cannot find evidence of that from the rod, from Brother Houteff's writing. The idea came from Davidians after that time. What was the purpose for the amphitheater? It's not entirely clear. But to say that Brother Houteff believed that the 144,000 were all going to be gathered into the city of Waco, Texas, cannot be verified. That's reading into the message what is not there. So, let's look at some demographics, just for curiosity. Let's look at the population of Waco, Texas. This is a graph that shows you the population from before 1880 all the way up to the present day. Today, 2021, the population of Waco, Texas, 141,936 people. Not even 144,000. So think about the infrastructure, the logistics of supporting that many people. You've got grocery stores and schools and a wastewater treatment plant. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of human waste, and it has to be processed. Water, lights, power, all of that has to be provided. How would you add another 144,000 people? Now let's look at what happened in the growth of the population of Waco. This is really interesting. Notice that the most rapid growth of the population of Waco was between the years 1940 and 1969. In 1940, there were 56,000 people, roughly, in Waco. In 1950, it had grown very quickly up to 85,000. And by 1960, it kind of capped off at 98,000. Notice the curve after that. The population actually decreased a little and it's flat, and then has slowly grown since then. But the period of the most rapid growth on the curve, that's the upward slope, is steepest between 1940 and 1960, the very years that at the height of Old Mount Carmel Center. Do you really believe that Brother Houteff thought that 144,000 people were going to show up in Waco, which was greater than the size of the entire city? How was he going to feed all those people? Where are you going to get the power? How are you going to deal with all their waste? I mean, it would have overwhelmed this city of Waco. It was over double the size of the city. So this begins to sound fairly absurd, and it is. And what about other Davidians? For example, Salem is not immune to this. Donna Dare studied with Bashan for a number of years, and they also have the idea that there's going to be a solemn assembly out there in the woods next to their Mount Carmel Center out there in Tomasi, Tennessee. Next, the National Forest is next door. They have 8 acres, okay? But where are the 144,000? Donna Dare told me once personally, he thinks they're going to all be gathered out in the woods there. We're talking National Forest, undeveloped. How are you going to handle that many people? How are you going to feed them? Where are you going to put them? I mean, it really becomes ridiculous when you begin to think about this. But this is what Davidians are teaching. And as we've seen, it's directly contradiction to the understanding of the scriptures. The solemn assembly has been going on ever since the rod has been here, and it continues on to this day. It's not dependent on a people gathered in a single geographic location. It's a cunningly devised fable. Started by who? Florence Houteff. Now, we don't agree with her time setting, but Davidians continue this false idea of a solemn assembly, cooked up in the brain of Florence and perpetuated by Bingham and Salem. It's utterly madness. It's insane. So, brethren, let us cease from man whose breath is in his nostrils and follow the original shepherd's rod. Some people might say, well, how are the 144,000 going to get to the kingdom? Well, we'll address that in another video, but I'll give you a hint. They're going to get on a chariot and God's going to take them over there. Bashan only believes that chariot is going to come to one location in Exeter, Missouri, that it can't stop in other places. Really? Well, brethren, that is utterly false. They're trying to avoid the obvious, that chariot that God's going to pick up and take his people from wherever they're located, whether it's in Africa or or Asia or Thailand or Philippines or Mexico. God has a way to get his people to Palestine. So let us not doubt God. And so we'll be addressing that topic about how the 144,000 are going to get to the kingdom when we look at Revelation 11 a little more detail. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, and look forward to our future presentations. So for more information, if you have any questions, comments, or would like to request an outline of the study as a PDF, or obtain print copies of the original tract literature that teaches the truth about the solemn assembly, then, to arrange for a formal Bible study at your convenience, then, feel free to contact us anytime. We have email here, upa5453@gmail.com. You can telephone, you can text us. We're on WhatsApp. You can find our website, whiteparish.org. In the United States, we have a website and a group in South Africa. There's their email, telephone number, and the website, upa.co.za. Their brethren in Zimbabwe, there's their email and phone number. So you can contact us and get a hold of that original literature. So, brethren, let us seek for the truth and turn aside from these cunningly devised fables and follow the original shepherd's rod and believe and trust that God has a way to get you, wherever you're located, to the kingdom. You think about the absurdity. How are people going to get from countries that are locked down under COVID lockdowns and get to the United States? And who's going to call this assembly? The porter? Are you kidding me? They're leaning on the arm of flesh. So let us trust in God and follow the original shepherd's rod. May God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure. Godspeed.